let me ask you something before we go anywhere else. Why does anything hurt in the first place? Not what's wrong with you. That's not the question. The real question is simpler and stranger. Why would a body, which has had millions of years to figure itself out, end up with a stiff neck from something as ordinary as reading a book or looking at a screen? That seems almost embarrassing for evolution, doesn't it? So either the body is badly designed, which seems unlikely given everything else it manages to do, or something else is going on. Something we're just not noticing. Here's a way to think about it that I find useful. Imagine you're stacking wooden blocks, the kind a kid plays with. One block on top of another, all the way up. If every block sits exactly centered on the one below it, the tower can go up quite high and just sit there stable, using almost no effort to stay upright. Gravity pulls straight down through the center of every block, and the whole structure practically holds itself. Now, here's the interesting part. What happens if you nudge just the top block half an inch to one side? You might think, well, it's just the top block, who cares? But that's not how stacks work. The block underneath it now has to lean ever so slightly to keep the whole thing from toppling, and the block under that one has to compensate too. Pretty soon, blocks near the bottom, the ones that had nothing to do with your original nudge, are working hard, straining just to keep the tower from falling over. A tiny shift at the top turns into real strain lower down. Your body is that stack of blocks. Your head sits on your neck sits on your shoulders and upper spine, which sits on your lower spine, which sits on your hips and legs. And here's the thing worth sitting with. Your head is not light. It's roughly the weight of a bowling ball. When it's centered, balanced right over the spine, the muscles in your neck barely have to work. The skeleton does the job, the way a well-stacked tower holds itself up. But tilt that bowling ball forward, even a little, even just from looking down at a phone, and suddenly muscles that were designed for small adjustments are now doing continuous, exhausting labor, hour after hour, day after day. So when someone feels tightness in the neck or shoulders, the tempting question is, what's broken? But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the better question is, where up the chain did the stack get nudged? And this is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the nudge doesn't have to come from something big or dramatic. It could come from somewhere you'd never suspect, somewhere small, quiet, and almost embarrassingly ordinary. A resting habit, a muscle you've never once thought to pay attention to, something sitting right behind your teeth, doing its own quiet work every minute of the day, whether you're aware of it or not. I'm not going to tell you what it is yet. That's the whole point of building an idea properly. You don't just hand someone the answer, you let them feel the shape of the question first. But I want you to hold on to this image of the stack of blocks because we're going to come back to it again and again. Every piece we explore, breathing, jaw position, that mysterious little muscle I just hinted at, is really just another way of asking the same question. Where in your personal stack might something small be quietly asking something else to work too hard? That's not a diagnosis. It's an invitation to pay attention. And paying attention, it turns out, is the beginning of almost everything worth learning. Do something for me right now. Don't change anything, just notice. Where is your tongue sitting in your mouth at this exact moment? Most people have never once asked themselves this question. Not once in their whole life. Isn't that strange? When you think about it. We spend money on gadgets to track our steps, our sleep, our heart rate, but this muscle that never stops working, that's active every time we speak, swallow, or even just sit quietly, gets zero attention. It's like owning a car for 40 years and never once checking what's under the hood. So let's check under the hood. The tongue is a muscle. Actually, it's a whole group of muscles working together, which is itself remarkable. Most muscles in your body attach to bone on both ends, like a rope tied between two posts. But the tongue is mostly what's called a muscular organ. It doesn't need bone at either end to hold its shape. That's what lets it do backflips of coordination, just so you can say the words extraordinary without thinking about it. But here's the question I want you to sit with. If it's a muscle, then just like your bicep or your calf, doesn't it have a resting position, a place it goes back to when you're not actively using it? Try this thought experiment. If you clench your fist all day, every day, for years, what happens to your forearm? It gets tired, tight, maybe even sore, and that tension doesn't always stay politely contained in the forearm. It can radiate into the wrist, the elbow, sometimes even the shoulder. Muscles are connected to other muscles through fascia and shared structures, so tension has this habit of traveling, of visiting the neighbors. Now, where does your tongue rest? For many people, the answer is low, flat on the floor of the mouth, maybe resting against the lower teeth. But there's another possibility that a relaxed, well-positioned tongue rests gently up against the roof of the mouth, the whole body of it, not just the tip. Why would that matter? Well, think about what's directly above the roof of your mouth, your palate, and just beyond that, structures connecting toward your sinuses and the base of your skull. And think about what's directly behind and below your tongue, your jaw, hanging there, needing something to help stabilize it. Here's where the curiosity really kicks in. If the tongue is meant to act almost like a gentle internal support, resting up rather than hanging down, then a tongue that habitually sits low might be quietly asking other muscles to pick up the slack. Which muscles? The ones in the jaw, the ones in the floor of the mouth. And since we already built the picture of the body as a stack of blocks, you can probably guess where this leads next. Jaw tension has a way of talking to neck tension, the way one nudged block talks to the ones below it. I want to be careful here because it's tempting to leap to conclusions, to say, aha, that's the cause of all discomfort everywhere. That would be sloppy thinking, and sloppy thinking is the enemy of real understanding. What we can say, honestly, is this: the tongue's resting position is a real, physical variable. It's something that exists, that you can observe, that you've probably never observed before today. And noticing a variable you've never noticed is always the first step toward understanding a system better. Not because it explains everything, but because it might explain something, and you won't know until you look. So here's your homework, and it costs nothing. A few times today, just check in. Where's your tongue right now? Is it low and heavy or gently lifted? You're not trying to fix anything yet. You're just becoming the kind of person who notices things other people walk past their whole lives without seeing. And that noticing, that simple, curious attention, is exactly the skill we're going to keep building as we move into breathing next. Here's a question that sounds almost too simple to ask out loud. How are you breathing right now? Not are you breathing? No, obviously you are, or we wouldn't be having this conversation. I mean, how? Is the air going in through your nose or your mouth? Is your chest rising, or is it lower down, near your belly, doing the work? Most people have no idea, because breathing is one of those rare things the body does automatically, without asking permission, thousands of times a day. And when something happens automatically, we stop paying attention to it. Which is exactly why it's worth stopping and paying attention to it now. Let's build this up with an image. Think of a bellows, the kind used to fan a fire. A good bellows has room to expand fully, drawing in a large volume of air with each pull, then pushing it out smoothly. Now imagine someone standing on one side of that bellows, or bending it at an awkward angle. It still works, technically, air still moves, but it has to work harder, faster, less efficiently to do the same job. Nothing is broken. It's just operating under a disadvantage it wasn't designed for. Your rib cage and diaphragm are that bellows. And here's the interesting part. The diaphragm, the big dome-shaped muscle underneath your lungs, works best when it has full room to move, down when you inhale, up when you exhale, like a piston with a clear, unobstructed path. But what happens if the stack of blocks we talked about earlier is off-center? If the head is forward, the shoulders rounded, the rib cage slightly compressed, the bellows gets bent. The diaphragm can't move through its full range. So what does the body do instead? It improvises. It recruits other muscles to help pull air in, muscles in the neck and upper shoulders that were never really built for breathing duty, only for lifting and turning the head. Now pause and connect this to something we already discussed. Remember the tongue resting low or resting up. It turns out the tongue and the nose have a quiet working relationship too. A tongue resting low, mouth slightly open, tends to go hand in hand with breathing through the mouth rather than the nose. And mouth breathing, especially the shallow upper chest kind, tends to favor exactly those neck and shoulder muscles doing extra work that they weren't meant to carry as a full-time job. Do you see how none of these pieces exist in isolation? They're not separate topics stacked side by side. They're more like instruments in the same orchestra, each one subtly influencing the tempo of the others. I want to be honest with you about something, though. I'm not telling you that mouth breathing causes neck pain, full stop, end of story. That would be the kind of overconfident claim That sounds satisfying but doesn't hold up under real scrutiny. What I'm saying is narrower and, I think, more honest. Breathing patterns and posture are mechanically linked in ways you can observe in your own body if you simply pay attention. And paying attention, again, is the whole game here. So try this right now without changing anything on purpose. Just notice, is the air moving mostly into your chest, lifting your shoulders slightly with each breath? Or is it moving lower into your belly and lower ribs, letting your shoulders stay quiet and still? There's no prize for the right answer because there isn't a single right answer for every person in every moment. There's only the value of knowing which one is actually happening in you. This is the same skill we practiced with the tongue, turning something invisible and automatic into something visible and known. And once you can see it, you're in a position to ask the next natural question. How does this rhythm connect to the jaw sitting just above it and the neck holding everything up? That's exactly where we're headed next. Let me ask you something you've probably never thought to ask yourself. When you're stressed, where does it show up first in your body? Some people say their shoulders creep up toward their ears. Some say their stomach ties itself in a knot. But an enormous number of people, if they really stop and check, will notice something happening in the jaw, a tightening, a clenching, sometimes so habitual they don't even register it until someone points it out. Why the jaw, of all places? Why not the elbow or the knee? Here's a way to think about it. Imagine two neighbors who share a thin wall between their apartments. If one neighbor is having a loud, restless night, music playing, footsteps pacing back and forth, the other neighbor doesn't get to opt out of hearing it. The wall isn't thick enough to keep the disturbance contained. It leaks through. Whether anyone intends it to or not, the jaw and the neck are a bit like that. They don't just happen to sit near each other by coincidence. They're wired together, structurally and functionally, sharing muscles, connective tissue, and nerve pathways that run through that whole region. So when the jaw muscles are working overtime, clenching, gripping, holding tension, it would be strange if that effort stayed neatly contained within the jaw and never leaked over into the neighboring neck muscles. Tension doesn't usually respect tidy boundaries like that. Let's build this idea up a little further with something you can test yourself. Try clenching your back teeth together firmly for about 5 seconds. Go ahead. Now notice, did you feel anything at all beyond your jaw? A little tightening under the ear, maybe along the side of the neck, or even up toward the temple. For a lot of people, the answer is yes, even from something that small and that brief. Now imagine that same low-grade clench happening not for 5 seconds, but for hours quietly while you're concentrating on a screen, or driving, or simply carrying the ordinary tension of a busy day. That's not a dramatic event. It's a slow accumulation, the same way a dripping faucet doesn't flood a room in a minute, but it will eventually fill a bucket if you let it run long enough. And here's where the earlier pieces of our picture start talking to each other. We already noticed that a tongue resting low, rather than gently supported against the roof of the mouth, might ask the jaw to do more stabilizing work. We already noticed that shallow upper body breathing tends to recruit neck and shoulder muscles as backup labor. Now we're adding a third thread, a tense or overworked jaw, whispering its tension sideways into the very same neck muscles that might already be working overtime for other reasons. None of these are separate, unrelated coincidences. They're neighbors on the same street, and they talk. But, and this matters, talking to each other doesn't mean any one of them is solely to blame. That's an important distinction. It's tempting, once you see a pattern like this, to want a single villain, a single fix, a single dramatic cause. Real systems are rarely that simple. The honest, useful takeaway isn't your jaw is ruining your neck. It's something quieter and more empowering. These regions of your body are in constant conversation, and becoming aware of that conversation gives you information you simply didn't have before. So here's a small experiment for the rest of your day. Notice, every so often, whether your back teeth are touching when they don't need to be. Most of the time, at rest, they're not supposed to touch at all. There should be a small, comfortable gap with the jaw hanging loose, unclenched. If you catch yours pressed together, you don't need to panic or diagnose anything. Just notice it, let it soften, and move on. That's the skill again. The same one we've been building this whole time. Not fixing, not fearing, just noticing. And once you're in the habit of noticing your jaw, your tongue, and your breath as parts of one connected system, You're finally ready for the part where we bring all of it together into a single, simple daily habit. Here's a small puzzle to start with. Why is it that so many people, when asked where stress lives in their body, point to the jaw? Not the elbow, not the shin, not some random joint, the jaw, again and again. That's not an accident. There's a reason worth digging into. Let's start with a basic fact and build from there. The muscles that move your jaw are some of the strongest, pound for pound, in your entire body, strong enough to generate serious force when you bite down. That's useful when you're eating. But strength without awareness is a strange thing, because a muscle that powerful doesn't need much encouragement to overwork itself. And where does it sit? Almost directly above the neck, sharing space, sharing nerves, sharing connective tissue with the very muscles that hold your head up all day long. Think of it this way. Picture two rooms connected by an open doorway, no wall between them at all, just open space. If someone starts running a loud fan in one room, do you think the sound stays politely inside that room? Of course not. It fills both rooms, because there was never a real separation to begin with. The jaw and the upper neck are a bit like that open doorway. They're not sealed off from each other. They share the party wall, so to speak, and activity in one space is felt in the other almost immediately. Now here's where it gets genuinely interesting and where curiosity should kick in. Muscle tension isn't usually a light switch. It's rarely fully on or fully off. It's more like a dimmer switch, sitting at low levels most of the time without us noticing at all. So the real question isn't, do you clench your jaw? Most people would say no, confidently, without checking. The better question is, right now, in this exact moment, are your back teeth touching, even slightly, when there's no reason for them to be? Go ahead and check. Many people discover to their surprise that the answer is yes, that a faint, low-level clench has been running quietly in the background like an app left open on a phone, draining a little energy without ever showing up on the screen. Let's connect this back to what we already know. A jaw that's subtly overworking, hour after hour, is asking for extra fuel, more blood flow, more muscular effort, and it's doing this using structures that sit right beside and partly overlap with the muscles supporting your head and neck. So if the neck is already working harder than it should, perhaps because of posture, perhaps because of shallow breathing, pulling in extra help from muscles never meant for that job, then a tense jaw isn't adding tension to some unrelated system. It's adding more weight to muscles that may already be carrying too much. I want to slow down here though, because it would be easy and wrong to turn this into a scary story. This isn't about announcing that everyone's jaw is silently destroying their neck. That's the kind of dramatic leap that sounds compelling, but isn't actually supported by careful reasoning. What we can responsibly say is this: the jaw and neck are mechanically and neurologically linked, close enough that tension patterns can plausibly influence one another. That's not a diagnosis. It's an observation about how the body is built, and observations are things you're allowed to sit with, test for yourself, and take seriously without needing a dramatic conclusion attached. So here's your task, simple and low stakes. A few times today, without judgment, just check. Are your teeth touching right now? Is your jaw hanging loose, with a little space between the upper and lower teeth, the way it's designed to rest? If you notice clenching, you don't need to fight it or force anything. Just let it soften, the way you'd gently turn down a dimmer switch rather than yanking a cord out of the wall. That single habit, checking in on the jaw the way we checked in on the tongue and the breath, is training you in something bigger than jaw awareness alone. It's training you to notice your own body as one connected system rather than a collection of separate parts that happen to share the same skin. And that skill is exactly what we'll bring together next into one simple, sustainable daily habit.